Ever notice after a wildfire how some houses are just fine and others, well, they're just gone?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if it's all just random chance, doesn't it?
Totally. Like, is surviving a fire just dumb luck?
Wind plays a huge role, for sure. But, how a house is built can actually make a big difference.
Really? So it's not just hoping for the best.
Not at all. We're going to do a deep dive today, all about how to build homes that can actually withstand fire.
Awesome. So by the end of this, we'll know what to look for, even if we're just checking out a house to buy.
Exactly. You'll be able to spot those fire-resistant features.
Okay, let's get into it. A lot of the articles we found mentioned siding as like the first line of defense.
Right, right.
One guy was shocked his old wood-sided house was still standing.
Oh, yeah, I read that one.
Seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with wood siding?
It all comes down to what's underneath. Even treated wood, it's still going to burn.
Right.
But a fire-resistant barrier, like gypsum sheeting, underneath the wood, that can be a game changer. It slows down that heat transfer. That's often enough to save the structure.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So even if you have wood siding, having that extra layer underneath is key.
Mm-hmm.
But what about other materials? I've heard fiber cement is becoming popular.
Yeah, fiber cement's a good choice. It's fire-resistant, durable, and it looks a lot like wood, which people like.
Oh, that's cool.
Stucco's another popular one, especially in places like, Southern California.
Yeah, yeah.
It's naturally fire-resistant. And get this, it's even better if you put a layer of gypsum underneath.
So you're basically building a heat shield into the walls themselves.
Pretty much.
Okay. And speaking of things that need shielding, windows. Imagine a wall of flames right next door. How much heat can a regular window even take?
Not a lot, unfortunately. They let heat through really easily. Double-pane windows, especially with tempered glass, those can buy you some time.
Okay.
But there was one article about a beachfront house in Malibu. It survived because it didn't even have windows facing the fire.
Wow, talk about drastic measures. But hey, it worked.
It did. It really makes you think about where those windows go.
Speaking of thinking differently, wasn't there an architect who designed homes with, like, built-in fire shutters?
Oh, yeah, Greg Faulkner. Super innovative guy. Those shutters, they create a solid barrier. Flames, heat, nothing's getting through.
That sounds straight out of a movie.
It kind of does. But, there are simpler ways to deal with the window issue, too.
Oh, like what?
What if you just had fewer windows on the sides of the house that face, the most likely fire direction?
Makes sense. Sometimes the simplest solution is best. Okay, let's move on to roofs. I'm picturing burning embers raining down.
Yeah.
That's got to be a nightmare. What materials can actually stand up to that?
Well, asphalt shingles, they're common, but they're made from petroleum, so...
Oh, yeah. Not ideal for a fire.
Not really. Metal roofing is much better.
But metal gets hot. You wouldn't want to be up there trying to fix a metal roof after a fire.
Exactly. So a lot of builders are adding a layer of gypsum underneath. It acts as a thermal barrier.
It's like you're using something meant to stop fire, to also protect from the heat of something that won't burn.
Yeah. It's all about thinking about the whole house as a system, right?
Totally. What about roof vents? They're important, but I bet they're also a weak point.
They are. It's a tough balance. We need vents to prevent moisture, but they can let embers in.
It's like a blowtorch effect, one article called it.
Yikes. One architect, Richard Chu, he's a big advocate for these special vents. They're fire activated, so when they get hot, they close right up.
That sounds pretty high tech.
It is. They use something called intumescent material, which expands when it's heated. Pretty cool stuff.
So you can have ventilation and fire safety. Okay, so we've talked siding, windows, roofs. What about some of the more, like, out there solutions?
Oh, there's some really cool stuff happening. Did you know, in some parts of Australia, new homes have to have water tanks just for fighting fires?
No way. That's amazing. So each house can kind of protect itself.
Exactly. What about exterior sprinkler systems, like spraying the whole building down with soapy water?
That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. But if it works, why not?
Right. Especially since insurance companies are getting more and more hesitant to cover homes in fire-prone areas.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
So taking those extra steps, it could be the difference between losing everything and saving your home.
It's amazing to think people are already doing some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But what about for those of us who aren't building a brand new house? Retrofitting seems kind of overwhelming, especially after hearing about all these potential upgrades.
Yeah, I get it. It can seem like a lot. But even small changes can make a big difference, Start with the basics, like creating that defensible space around your house. It's all about building a buffer zone.
So no more stacking firewood right up against the house.
Exactly. And think about your landscaping. Fire-resistant plants, spaced out properly, can really help.
Okay, that seems manageable.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any easy changes we can make to the structure itself? Stuff that doesn't require, like, a total renovation?
Absolutely. Roof vents, for example. Upgrading to those fire-activated vents, that's a pretty straightforward process, and they give you a lot of protection.
What about windows? Replacing all of them with double-paned tempered glass, that seems pricey. Are there any budget-friendly options?
No, there are. Exterior shutters, those can be really effective at blocking the heat, and they're not too expensive.
I've also heard of fire-resistant coatings you can put on existing siding. Are those worth looking into?
They can be, but you got to do your research. Look for coatings that have been tested by, like, a third party, not just any old paint that says fire resistant on the label.
So buyer beware. You get what you pay for. But even with the best materials and upgrades, it seems like having a plan is just as important.
You're telling me. Have you thought about how you'd get emergency alerts if there's a fire? Or do you have a go bag ready? With all the essentials in case you need to evacuate quickly.
To be honest,
Right.
I haven't given that much thought. It's easy to focus on the building stuff and forget about the human side of things.
I hear you. But being prepared, both physically and mentally, that's key. Talk to your family about what to do during a fire. Have a meeting place picked out. Practice your evacuation route. These things matter.
It's all about taking those steps ahead of time, right? Like that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't a one-time thing. Fire safety, it's an ongoing process. Staying informed, being extra careful during fire season, even talking to your local fire department, it all adds up.
This has been so helpful. It can feel a little scary thinking about all this, but it's also empowering to know we can actually do something to protect ourselves and our homes.
I agree. Knowledge is power, right?
Sure.
The more you understand about wildfires and home safety, the better decisions you can make.
Well said. Now, switching gears a bit, let's talk about the bigger picture. I was struck by how insurance companies are getting more and more reluctant to cover homes in fire-prone areas. What does that mean for homeowners?
It's a big worry, and it's happening all over the country. Wildfires are becoming more common, more intense, so insurance companies are reevaluating their risk, which often means higher premiums for people in high-risk zones. Sometimes they even refuse to renew policies altogether.
That's got to be incredibly stressful. What options do people have if they can't get affordable insurance?
It's a tough spot, no easy answers. Some states have FAIR plans, which are run by the state, for when regular insurance isn't available.
Okay.
But those plans, they usually have limited coverage, and the premiums are still higher.
It's a catch-22. You live in a high-risk area, so you need insurance, but it's either too expensive or you can't even get it.
Yeah, that's the problem. It forces people to make hard choices. Some decide to self-insure, basically taking on the risk themselves. Others decide to sell and move to areas with less fire risk. Wildfire risk is creating these, huge social and economic problems.
It's not just individual homeowners either. It's the strain on resources for fighting fires, property values going down, even the possibility of entire communities being displaced.
Absolutely. Researchers, people who make policy, community leaders, they're all working on this. One promising idea is to shift away from an individualistic approach and move toward a more collective way of thinking about wildfire prevention. Things like creating fuel breaks, managing forests better, promoting fire-resistant building codes.
It's about recognizing that wildfire is a risk for everyone, so everyone needs to be responsible.
Exactly. We need a more collaborative approach to preparedness and resilience. We're all in this together.
That's a powerful message. Even taking steps to protect our own homes and educating ourselves, that contributes to a bigger culture of preparedness.
Totally. It's empowering to know we can all play a part in creating a safer future. And that brings us to another really important aspect of this whole thing, the psychological impact. Living under the constant threat of wildfire, it can take a toll.
You're right. The anxiety, the PTSD, even depression, these are very real consequences.
And they're often overlooked. Experiencing a wildfire, or even just the constant worry that one might happen, it can have long-lasting effects.
So what can we do about that? It's not like we can just, build a fire-resistant mental barrier.
Well, the first thing is to acknowledge how you're feeling. It's okay to feel anxious, scared, overwhelmed. Talk about it with people you trust, friends, family, maybe a therapist. Sharing those burdens can help.
A problem shared is a problem halved, right?
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of practical steps to manage your anxiety. Stay informed about fire conditions. Have a plan. Practice coping mechanisms like deep breathing or meditation. It can help you feel more in control.
Mental health is just as important as physical safety when it comes to wildfire preparedness.
Couldn't agree more. And remember, there are resources to help you cope. Mental health professionals, support groups, community organizations. Reach out if you need to.
It's been really interesting learning about all these different ways to approach wildfire safety. It's a lot to think about, but it all comes down to taking those steps, both individually and as a community, to build a safer future. Before we wrap things up, though, there's something I've been wondering about. We've talked a lot about the practical stuff and the emotional side of wildfire risk, but what about the aesthetic side of things? Can a home be like fire-resistant A&D beautiful at the same time?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. You know, we often picture fire-resistant features as kind of utilitarian, concrete bunkers, metal shutters, not exactly cozy and inviting, but it doesn't have to be that way. Architects and designers are getting really creative these days. They're finding ways to incorporate fire-resistant elements without sacrificing style.
That's awesome to hear. So what kind of strategies are they using?
Well, there's a big movement towards using natural materials that are inherently fire resistant. Things like stone, brick, and even certain types of wood that are naturally less flammable.
Oh, interesting.
Those materials, they often have a warmth and character that you just don't get with synthetic materials.
So it's about working with nature, not against it.
Hmm.
What about specific design elements? Are there any features that can help strike that balance between, like, form and function?
Absolutely. Instead of those traditional roof vents, which we know can be a weak point, some architects are using continuous ridge vents. They run along the peak of the roof. So they provide great ventilation, but there's less risk of embers getting in.
That's smart.
Huh.
And what about landscaping? We talked about how important that is for fire safety, but can it also add to the beauty of a property?
For sure. Think about a drought-tolerant garden, maybe with pathways of gravel or stone. It's not only fire resistant, but it creates this visually appealing, low-maintenance landscape.
It's like you're creating a space that's safe, beautiful, and environmentally friendly all at once.
Exactly.
It gives me hope that maybe these fire-resistant design trends will become more mainstream.
I hope so too. Wouldn't it be great if beauty and safety went hand in hand?
I think so. Well, we've covered so much in this deep dive, everything from the nitty-gritty of fire-resistant materials to the bigger picture of how wildfire risk affects us as individuals and as a society. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
I agree. And I really hope our listener is feeling more aware, more empowered, and maybe even inspired to take action.
To our listener, thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of fire-resistant homes. Remember, the more you know about wildfire risk and the steps you can take to stay safe, the better prepared you'll be. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep exploring.